Justice is a complex concept and is actually almost undefined. The proof is, when the Great Depression enveloped the United States, where at that time the social gap widened and the law was no longer on the side of the common people, a big question arose about where justice really lies. Does justice only belong to the rulers and the rich? Or can justice also be achieved by the oppressed, even through illegal means and actions? This question can be tested in the case of Pretty Boy Floyd, a legendary name because his figure seemed to break the concept of justice itself. When the American people were expecting a hero figure to help them out of hardship and despair, what appeared was not a hero in cool clothes, but a bank robber who continued to help the common people out of economic distress. Was he a modern-day Robin Hood, or just a criminal who knew how to take advantage of the situation? This time we will explore the figure of Pretty Boy Floyd more deeply to understand his case and reinterpret justice. The man who would later be nicknamed Pretty Boy actually had the real name Charles Arthur Floyd. He was born on February 3, 1904 in Huddersfield, Georgia, to Walter Lee Floyd and Mamie Helen. Since childhood, Floyd lived in economic limitations. His family was just a poor farming family who continued to try to meet their living needs. But then in 1911, in the hope of getting a better fate, Floyd's family moved to Hawkins, Oklahoma. At that time, Floyd was only 7 years old and he grew up in a small farming community in the area, which was close to Cookson Hills, a place that would later be used as a refuge by Floyd. As time went by and he got older, Floyd, who was poor and unemployed, realized that taking odd jobs would not help his life and his family from the threat of starvation. This situation seemed to make Floyd fed up with the poverty that ensnared him, so he began to commit petty crimes. In 1922, at the age of 18, Floyd was arrested for the first time after he stole $3.50 from the local post office. At that time, the amount stolen by Floyd was quite large, and it was clear that he had harmed the victims. However, Floyd was not detained for long. He served a 3-year prison sentence and was soon released. As if not deterred by his first arrest, not long after his release, Floyd acted again. On September 16, 1925, located in St. Louis, Missouri, the young man was arrested again for committing a salary robbery of an undisclosed amount. But this robbery succeeded in getting him sentenced to 5 years in prison. Floyd is known to have only served 3.5 years and was granted parole by the authorities, a decision that may be regrettable. Because after this parole, Floyd actually hung out with gangsters in Kansas City, Missouri. From them, Floyd finally got access to get a machine gun and made it his professional trademark. From here, Floyd began to commit bank robberies. He worked with other people to rob. The targets were large banks in Ohio, Michigan, and Kentucky. During this period, it is said that he got the nickname Pretty Boy, but the origin of this nickname is still debated. Some say that Orville Drake gave him the nickname because Floyd wore a white button-down shirt and trousers to work in the oil fields. So the people in the oil fields started calling him Pretty Boy and changed it to Pretty Boy Floyd. However, another version says that the head of the recitation department in the Croghan Street Lewis office robbery that occurred in 1925 gave rise to the nickname because he described one of the robbers as a pretty boy with what cheeks. Regardless of which is true, but in fact, Floyd himself really hated the nicknames that were given. Back to his robbery in 1929, Floyd became one of the most wanted people because he was known to be involved in a number of criminal cases. On March 9th, it was recorded that Floyd was arrested in Kansas City for investigation and was arrested again on May 7th on charges of being a vagrant and committing robbery on the highway. But this time, he was released the next day. The freedom was short-lived because 2 days later, Floyd was arrested again in Pueblo, Colorado, and charged with vagrancy. The arrest resulted in a fine of $50 and a sentence of 60 days in jail. After being in and out of prison, Floyd seemed to prefer to continue his increasingly uncontrolled criminal activities. On March 8, 1930, Floyd was arrested again by police in Akron, Ohio. However, in this arrest, he used the alias Frank Mitchell and was charged with the murder of a policeman in Akron who was killed during a robbery. On May 20th of the same year, he was arrested again in Toledo, Ohio, on charges of bank robbery and murder. Floyd finally had to go through the legal process in court, and was found guilty of bank robbery in Sylvania, Ohio, on November 24, 1930. The court sentenced him to 12 to 15 years in prison at the Ohio State Penitentiary, but Floyd did not stay there long because he managed to escape from the prison. It should be noted that at that time, the Great Depression had hit the United States. When Floyd, who was on the run, returned to Oklahoma, he learned that people throughout the area had lost their farmland due to the actions of banks trying to acquire the land to expand their agricultural activities and increase profits because small farms were considered unprofitable. In fact, the community had fought hard to defend their land and homes, even to the point of facing bank tractors with firearms and bravely trying to take back what they believed was their right. Unfortunately, their efforts were not entirely successful. Their land was still being seized. In the midst of this increasingly difficult situation, Floyd returned. He finally started robbing again at the banks that had previously robbed the community. During his action at the bank, in addition to taking cash, he also destroyed or stole farm mortgage records. Without the mortgage records, the bank certainly could not seize the farmer's land. Floyd also used the proceeds of his robbery to buy food and distribute it to people in need. This action, for those who are oppressed, is a heroic act. That's why many people respect Floyd, even help protect him, become his communication network, feed him, and accept him into their homes when Floyd stops by. In Oklahoma, they call Floyd Robin Hood from Coxon Hills. During that time, Floyd was suspected of being involved in the deaths of two Kansas City brothers, Wally and Paul Ash, who were ram dealers. The two were found dead in a burning car on March 25, 1931. In addition, Floyd's gang members were also known to have committed a crime by killing police officer R.H. Kartzner of Bowling Green, Ohio, on April 23rd. Not stopping there, Floyd again committed a personal murder on July 22nd, and the victim was a federal agent named Curtis Bork in Kansas City, Missouri. A former sheriff named Irv Kelly from McIntosh County, Oklahoma, who was also a victim of Floyd's shooting when Sheriff Irv tried to arrest him on April 7, 1932. In the same year, around November, 3 members of Floyd's gang attempted to rob the Farmers and Merchants Bank in Boley, Oklahoma. All of these cases made Floyd's criminal record very long. Even so, the public still associates him with one of the ideal types, namely the American outlaw hero, who is often depicted as a figure who steals from the rich and gives the results to the poor. Floyd reached the peak of his criminality when on June 17, 1933, a shootout occurred known as the Kansas City Massacre. In this case, Floyd and Adam Riccati were suspected of being the main perpetrators of this incident, which resulted in the deaths of 4 law enforcement officers. The FBI director at that time, who was held by J. Edgar Hoover, finally used this incident to gain greater authority in the pursuit of Floyd. However, Floyd's involvement in the incident is still debated among historians, because according to the information circulating, the massacre was actually an attack by Vernon Miller and his group on law enforcement officers who were escorting Frank Galinas, a robber, to move towards a car parked at Union Station. In the shootout, Kansas City detectives, namely William Grooms and Frank Hermanson, as well as Oklahoma Police Chief Otto Reed, plus Special Agent Ray Caffrey, were declared dead. Nash himself died in the car, shot in the head by the person who was thought to be his savior. 2 other Kansas City police officers who were in the middle of the shootout survived by slumping down in front of the back seat of the car for cover, and they pretended to be dead. When the shooters were checking the car, other officers came from the police station and opened fire on them, forcing them to flee. Vernon Miller himself was later found dead on November 27, 1933, outside Detroit, Michigan. Autopsy results showed that he died after being beaten and strangled. Floyd and Reed fell under strong suspicion as accomplices of Vernon Miller in the massacre. Several pieces of evidence found at the scene incriminated them, although some of it was later disputed. In addition, their presence in Kansas City on the day of the incident had actually become one of the indicators that made the authorities suspect them. The investigation that was carried out seemed to be more complicated because in several records it was stated that although there were eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen them, this identification was still doubtful. However, the discovery of Richard T.'s fingerprints on a beer bottle in Vernon Miller's hiding place caused suspicions of Richard T. and Floyd's involvement to strengthen again. In addition, there was information from the underworld that stated that Floyd and Richard T. were the perpetrators of the shooting. This information made Edgar Hoover firmly state his belief in their guilt. The suspicion strengthened when Floyd's bank robbery partner, Elvin Karpus, admitted that Floyd admitted his involvement in the massacre while chatting with him. The problem is, there is an oddity in this claim that has the potential to be a false claim or confession. This oddity was realized when Floyd's body was later examined and was not found. Signs of injury, even though it was mentioned in the report that the alleged perpetrator, Floyd, was wounded in the shoulder by a gunshot during the attack. Furthermore, although there is information from the underworld that mentions Floyd and Richard T. as the perpetrators, there is also other information from the same source that states their innocence, so that the information about Floyd's involvement cannot be trusted, let alone fully relied on. Floyd's family itself has made a statement that Floyd has admitted to many other crimes he committed, but they strongly deny Floyd's involvement in the Kansas City massacre. Richard T. also made the same defense by denying his involvement in the incident. So even though the authorities have a lot of evidence pointing to the involvement of Floyd and Richard T., there are still gaps and doubts, even debates about their actual roles in the tragic event. The Kansas City Police Department actually received a postcard on June 30th, 1933, sent from Springfield, Missouri. The postcard contained a statement from someone claiming to be Charles Floyd, in which he stated that he was not involved in the massacre of officers in Kansas City. After looking into it in more detail, the police department believed that the note was genuine and was indeed sent by Floyd. In various accusations directed at him, Floyd also reportedly continued to deny his involvement in the massacre to the agents who had injured him in the shootout until he died. Later, a book by Michael Newton, released in 2002, discussed the massacre and stated based on ballistics tests that some of the killings in Kansas City were actually from shots fired by a law enforcement officer who seemed unfamiliar with his weapon. This adds to the doubt about Floyd's involvement in the incident. After the death of Joe Dillinger, FBI Director Edgar Hoover designated Floyd as public enemy #1. This led local police and FBI agents led by Melvin Purvis, under the direct supervision of Inspector Samuel P. Cowley, to successfully find Floyd in a cornfield located in East Liverpool, Ohio. On October 22, 1934, they were involved in a shootout and shot Floyd, which caused Floyd to die without trial. But from this story, there are actually various versions of the story about who actually shot Floyd and how he died. Previously, on October 18th, it was known that Floyd and Rachette left Buffalo, New York. The next day at around 3 a.m., their car had a single accident, skidding and hitting a telephone pole due to thick fog. Although no one was injured in the incident, their car was badly damaged so that it was impossible to use it on the trip again. To overcome the situation, Floyd and Rachette sent 2 of their female friends to seek help. The 2 women were tasked with finding a tow truck and accompanying the truck driver to the accident site. The plan was for the 2 women to go with the truck driver to town to fix the car, while Floyd and Rachette would wait on the side of the road until the car was fixed. But unfortunately, after morning arrived on October 19th, 2 motorists identified as Joe Fryman and his son-in-law named David O'Hanlon passed the accident scene and saw 2 men in suits lying on the side of the road. Feeling suspicious, they reported it to John Foltz, the police chief in Westfield, Ohio. The report made John come to investigate with officers Grover Putz and William Irwin. Seeing their arrival, Rachette immediately fled into the woods and was chased by 2 other officers. Meanwhile, John moved towards Floyd. Floyd's reflexes worked. He quickly pulled his gun and fired so that a shootout occurred, which caused John to be wounded in the leg, and Grover was wounded below the right. After injuring the 2 officers, Floyd had the opportunity to escape into the woods, following Rachette, but that actually triggered a bigger chase. John asked for help from local police, including Chester Speed, a World War I veteran who served as a sniper. The law enforcement officers continued the pursuit. They initially caught Rachette, but Floyd remained at large. News of the pursuit quickly spread. Police in the surrounding area were immediately mobilized to help with the search, and an FBI team was immediately sent to the location. On October 22nd, a few days after the first pursuit, and soon to be the day of Floyd's death. That day, Floyd actually managed to get a ride to Silver Pool, Ohio. He went to a pool hall owned by his friend, Charles Joy, and even got food from his friend. After leaving the pool hall, the clarity of Floyd's fate is still unclear. Various reports of the events after this have various versions from FBI agents, local law enforcement officers, and civilians who were around the scene. However, all of these reports essentially agree that Floyd was indeed stopped by a group of law enforcement officers shortly after he left the pool hall, and he tried to escape on foot. Not long after, he was shot and injured by the officers who were chasing him, who then managed to catch Floyd and officially place him in federal custody. However, until now, there are still different reports about which officers shot Floyd, how many times the shots were fired, and the order in which the incident occurred. Some reports say that several officers fired the shots simultaneously, while other reports say that the order of the shots occurred differently. This raises questions about who was actually responsible for Floyd's injuries and how the incident unfolded. According to Special Agent Winford Hopton, FBI agents themselves participated in the final exchange of gunfire with Floyd, and local law enforcement arrived later. Existing FBI records state that 4 of their agents, Winford Hopton, Samuel Key, Mackey Jr., and David Hall, led by Melvin Purvis, and 4 members of the East Liverpool Police Department, consisting of Herman Lowe Jr., Chester Smith, and Glenn Montgomery. Led by Chief Hugh Matt Dillmore, were searching the area south of Clarkson, Ohio in 2 cars. They then saw a car moving from behind the corn barn and then moved back to make sure. Floyd emerged from the car and immediately pulled out a .45 caliber pistol. Responding to Floyd's actions, the FBI agent opened fire. After a shootout for some time, Floyd reportedly said, "I'm done. You've shot me twice." This report is actually very different from a report that appeared in the news at the time, where the news report stated that Floyd crawled out of the corn barn towards the Dyke car before finally turning towards a wooded ridge. Purvis had shouted the word "stop" to Floyd, but Floyd continued to run. Realizing that Floyd would most likely escape the pursuit, Agent Purvis ordered another officer to shoot Floyd so that he was seriously injured by the 4 shots that hit him. He was known to be alive at the time and was arrested. Handcuffs were placed on his wrists. Injured and handcuffed, Floyd used his remaining strength to ask an officer about who had given him information about his whereabouts. There was no answer. Floyd chose to keep his mouth shut after that by refusing to answer Purvis's questions regarding his involvement in the events in Kansas City. However, when asked his name, Floyd still answered, and he also asked about Eddie, who was most likely Adam Ricchetti's nickname. In the midst of his condition, Floyd also said that he was shot twice, even though in reality he received 4 gunshot wounds. He died from the gunshot wounds. Purvis in his report never revealed the last words spoken by Floyd before his death. After Floyd's death, his belongings were checked. From the findings at the location, it is suspected that 4 days earlier, Floyd and his 2 accomplices had carried out a bank robbery that succeeded in taking $500 in cash. Floyd received a share of the proceeds of the robbery of $120, which was found among his belongings. In addition, officers also found a watch and a keychain that had 10 notches or scratch marks, which were thought to represent the 10 people Floyd had killed. This FBI report actually caused debate. Moreover, after Chester Smith, Police Captain S. Liverpool, actually gave a different picture of the incident in a Time magazine issue in 1979. In his testimony, he admitted to being the first person to shoot Floyd using a .32 caliber Winchester rifle and deliberately aimed only to injure him, not to kill him. Chester Smith claimed that he already knew that Melvin Purvis, the FBI agent in the pursuit that day, would not be able to shoot Floyd accurately, so he himself took action to paralyze the fugitive. 2 shots fired by Smith hit Floyd, causing him to fall to the ground and unable to stand upright. After ensuring that Floyd was no longer armed, Smith disarmed him. However, before any further action was taken, Purvis immediately ran, approached them, and ordered Smith to move away because Purvis wanted to talk to Floyd. After that, Smith stated that Purvis tried to interrogate Floyd, who was already injured. However, Floyd, who was known as a stubborn and unyielding figure, did not give the desired answer. Instead, he only said rudely and cursed at Purvis. Frustrated by the response, Purvis eventually gave the order to shoot Floyd to one of his men, Herman Hollis. The order prompted Hollis to unhesitatingly raise his submachine gun and shoot Floyd at point-blank range, killing him instantly. When Chester Smith was asked in his interview whether there was an attempt by the FBI to cover up the truth, He responded emphatically that it must have been done because the FBI did not want the news to get out that Floyd had been killed in such a tragic manner. This has led to speculation that the FBI may have staged Floyd's death to make it look like a heroic act rather than an execution on the spot. Smith's testimony challenges the official narrative that Floyd was shot in a shootout and died of his wounds in combat. If true, it adds to the long list of controversies surrounding the FBI's actions in hunting criminals during that era. However, Smith's testimony was denied by Hopton himself in a letter to the editor of Time magazine, published on November 19, 1979. In his letter, Hopton stated that he was indeed one of 4 FBI agents present when Floyd was killed in a garden outside East Liverpool. According to him, East Liverpool police, including Chester Smith, only arrived after Floyd was already seriously injured, contrary to Smith's claim that he was the first to pin Floyd down. In addition, Hopton also emphasized that when Floyd faced the 4 FBI agents, he tried to turn and shoot them. In response, 2 of the 4 FBI agents immediately opened fire, killing him instantly. This statement contradicts Smith's story that Floyd was only injured initially and was then executed on Purvis's orders. Furthermore, Hopton firmly denied that Agent Herman Hollis was involved in the incident, a source who also supports this denial, by stating that although Smith's claim has received widespread attention, there is no evidence that Hollis was at the scene when Floyd was shot. Even in the official FBI profile of Hollis, there is no record of his involvement in the incident. Hopton also asserts that after Floyd died, his body was transported back to East Liverpool using his own car. This shows that the FBI controlled the entire operation from start to finish, without significant involvement from the local police. Furthermore, in a memo dated October 29, 1934, FBI Director Edgar Hoover instructed an assistant named Edward Allen Tam to return Floyd's personal belongings to his mother. After the items were documented, one of the items of particular interest was Floyd's watch, which had 10 notches or scratches on it. Hoover himself speculated that the marks might be a kind of murder chart to mark the number of people Floyd had killed throughout his criminal career. However, it is still not known for sure which version is much more correct. The death of Pretty Boy Floyd remains controversial and shrouded in mystery. It is also unknown whether he was actually involved in the massacre in Kansas City, because until the end of his death, Floyd still defended himself that he was not guilty of the murder. After his death, Floyd's body lay in state briefly at the D.S. Liverpool Funeral Home in Ohio. Then his body was sent to Oklahoma. Floyd's public burial was held in Salisaw. His funeral was attended by an estimated 20,000 to 40,000 people, making it the largest funeral in Oklahoma history. Floyd was eventually buried in Athens, Oklahoma, where he grew up and began his legendary criminal career.